Hello, so I'm going to read through chapter 2 of Job. The heading at the top of this chapter in my Bible says Satan attacks Job's health. It says Satan appearing again before God obtains further permission to tempt Job, or tempt would be another word for like test or give a trial to. In verse 7, it says he strikes him with painful boils. And in verse 9, it says Job reproves his wife. So let's read through this and see what's going to happen here. All right. So again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And I know in last chapter talked about the sons of God, that traditionally these are seen as angels, and this is kind of like a heavenly scene. But some people do see, and I've heard that these might just be godly men. But I think for this it seems like it might be more accurate that they are angels in this particular reference of sons of God. Verse 2, and the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And he still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without cause." So it's very interesting here that God starts out the same way. Essentially, have you considered my servant Job? And this is the same way he addressed him in the last chapter. And just kind of holding out there to Satan, I don't want to say baiting him, but just stating the obvious. And then coming back to say, and to further promote this idea that he has still held fast to his integrity, even though what Satan did. So verse 4, so Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life." So it's not super clear what skin for skin means. But right after that, it says, yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. And I think if we think about it just a little bit, skin for skin, if someone were to come and give you and want to take your skin away, or in Job's case, we find out what happens to his skin. There's really not much. I mean, maybe there's a person out there that would be willing to do without their skin to get something material in life back or something, but it's not super common for someone to want to give up their skin specifically, or as we see next to that, something to do with their life. So outside of, I'll give skin to get skin back. There's really not a good trade when your body is your health is fading, your life is fading, your life is taken. So verse 5, but stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. So this is Satan talking. Verse 6, and the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." Verse 7, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Verse 8, and he took for himself a potsherd. So Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. So it doesn't specifically say what Satan afflicted him with, but it does say he's got painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, and he's got a potsherd to scrape himself. So these are probably boils and blisters that are probably kind of starting to open up, and he's probably wanting, a boil is going to leave a bump on your skin. It's going to leave an irregular shape. And if I'm kind of thinking through that, being afflicted with that, you've got that potsherd to scrape. He's probably trying to kind of smooth things out, or maybe there's some discomfort. He's trying to get some relief by itching these wounds that are maybe starting to break open. It does seem in this case that Satan has gotten to Job a lot quicker possibly than in the chapter before, because in the chapter before, though everything happened on one day, it does make reference that there might have been some time elapsing from the time Satan got permission to attack Job and his things, because it said on a certain day, and these things happened. In this one, it says he went out from the presence of the Lord and struck him. So it's just, I'm imagining in this case, maybe it was a lot quicker, a lot more immediate. I do work with people, and I do work with behavior and trauma with people. And so one thing I do know is that when you've had a lot of trauma, like what we see Job going through, the chapter before, your body can become more susceptible to some other ailments, because the body under amounts of stress does try to break down. Now this story is sharing a scene that's got some supernatural elements that Satan is involved in, it seems, in causing these painful boils on Job. But if it just seems like these things are kind of going hand in hand. The progression here is he's got all this trauma, and now his skin's being impacted. So Satan's definitely seems to be using this to his advantage. Verse 8, and he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. It's not super clear what this means, he's in the ashes. It could mean he's maybe humbling himself to seek favor from God. He could be cast out of his town because of the boils that are on him, or others from a superstitious standpoint may want to have distanced himself from him. But what we do know is he's sitting in the midst of ashes. In verse 9, it says, then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. In verse 10, Job says, but he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God? And shall we not accept adversity? In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. So it's hard to say why, what's going on with Job's wife, why she's saying this to him. I don't know if I mentioned it in the last chapter, but the word curse here is the same word as bless, but it's like blessing God in an evil sense. And so it's hard to say where she's coming from. If she's seems to be upset with him, so she's saying curse God and die, she just lost her children as well. Or if she's out of compassion for him, saying, hey, it's probably not a righteous thing. Probably wouldn't have been a righteous thing for him to take his life, but maybe a workaround would be to curse God or bless God in an evil way, knowing that God's going to end his life. So it's hard to know what was going on inside of his wife when she said this. I think I typically took this as, she's just not seeing clearly. She's not very supportive. But maybe this was a statement of mercy. It's hard to know, but we do know she said she's pointing out that, hey, he's holding fast to his integrity. He's sticking to his guns. That doesn't seem to be working for him. And she's saying, curse God and die. That maybe that's the better path to take, or maybe she's upset with him and she just wants to be rid of him as well. But he reminds her that it's important to accept everything from God. And that's just, it's a hard thing to do when you've got something hard going on, to keep with an attitude toward God, that God has not changed. God is still worth the respect to be given, whether we get what we want or not. And I think that's a very different mindset than, God's done something great for me, so now I'm going to do something for him. I think there's a mindset that God deserves worship and respect because he's God, whether or not we get something out of it. I think that's the better attitude, because one attitude is more, if we're thinking about what we're getting from God by serving him, that's more of a self-focused attitude. And there's a lot in Scripture that says the focus needs to be God-centered. So when we're God-centered, it doesn't, God doesn't change. So what is due him doesn't change. And when we look at the big picture, the fact that God's created everything, and not to mention that through Christ, it says God has redeemed the world back to himself, meaning he's paid for everything back. So not only did he create, and he owns everything because he created it, but in this idea that his creation has kind of turned from him or has been taken, he has also purchased it back. And when you purchase something, then you have the rights to that. So God, Job is kind of pointing that out, that in everything there should be this acceptance of God, and accepting what he's doing. All right, so we got a little title here, Job's 3 friends, and we go into verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard all of this adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. So his friends are really wanting to be helpful here. So that's what I'm seeing in that statement. In verse 12, it says, "And they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven." So this was very alarming for them. It looks like they've looked at him. They don't recognize him because physically he is so changed because of what's happening in his skin, the boils and everything that's covering him. Not to mention the wounds that he might be causing himself with this potsherd. It's hard to say what he looked like, but I can imagine there's a lot of just things not looking the way to be able to recognize him. In verse 13, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. It's very interesting to me that they sat for 7 days with him before saying anything. I believe it's, when we see somebody suffering, I think it's at least culturally now, it seems normal to want to say something. A lot of times we'll say it's going to be okay, this is fine. I don't know if those kind of messages really get down to the heart of an issue. I think in some cases saying things like that can kind of skirt over the problem, and it might become more about the person saying it than it is about the person suffering. In other words, I may want to feel better, so I'm saying it's going to be fine. And for the person, it's not feeling fine. It doesn't seem to be fine. But his friend sat for 7 days. And to me, that's a good amount of time to be someone without saying anything. So I think it just shows kind of their character. And also shows that they didn't really know what to say. I think it's human nature to want to figure things out, solve the problem, meet the needs of others, and contribute in some way. And they had nothing because they've got this conflict in their mind about their friend who I believe they would think is pretty wonderful, and yet he's suffering so bad. And so on one hand, they want to figure out what is causing the suffering, because as human nature, we don't want to fall into that same kind of suffering. So what kind of pattern do we need to recognize and be able to identify so that we can understand this, and also live without this fear that hey, maybe this is going to happen to us as well. And on the other hand, they want to believe that their friend is good, and that that he is who they've believed him to be. And so now they're sitting in silence. So I just think that's very interesting that it took 7 days before anybody spoke. And I look forward to reading the next chapter with you. And so we'll see you next time.